Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at MuraCon. There's a lot of familiar faces here, a lot of the MuraCon regulars, and actually quite a few people that are not MuraCon regulars, and it's great to have you here. Part of that with the DX track that we're putting on, it's great to have a new audience here at MuraCon. But what we're doing in this room actually is the MuraCore audience, and screensavers are awesome. So what we're going to be talking about today, in this case, is Launchpad, how, what, and why. And so Launchpad is a project that I've been working on for about a year or so, on top of the other regular work, is a side project that we're doing to make us build better websites internally at Blue River, and then how to share that back with the community, because that's a big part of what we do. Is just we're an open source product, and to share our ideas, and you get great things out of what we build. So what is Launchpad? Launchpad is a toolkit currently being developed to help rapidly create themes for Mura CMS. And so who uses Launchpad? Both beginner and expert Mura CMS theme developers will find elements of Launchpad useful. I myself, as a Mura theme developer, would consider myself an expert user. Been using Mura for quite a long time now. But I wanted to make this tool that, as we bring on new developers to the team, we have a toolkit to get them up and running quickly. So, hello. For those of you that have not met me yet, I'm Evan Dunham. I'm a senior front-end developer at Blue River, and I've been here since 2009. So you can say that I've built quite a few Mura themes in my tenure at Blue River. So talk about the Launchpad Genesis here. So I had to have a little nod to the Sega Genesis. That's what I grew up with. But like, how did the idea of the Launchpad toolkit come up? And so we worked on a website for Riverline Community College. And through building it, we were realizing that we started to build these blocks that could be, or modules that would be, you could repurpose and be reused on multiple different websites. You know, you've got your hero carousel, you have these call to action links, there's your primary nav, here's how you handle your search, here's these columnized quick links. You know, here's the call to action on the main area with the photo, here's how you handle stylized news and events. And we were just finding that this could be the foundation of like a new starter theme as for us internally, including, let's see, maybe there's tabular layouts. This is for one of their program pages. They had this pretty wild responsive table of all of their courses and everything they can do, along with course description, credits, and it was just neat to be able to try to think about how could we reuse that on other projects going forward. Some of those things we also build with these little colored tiles where you can choose the different icons, different grid layouts. Here's your sidebar navigation. I mean, what we see is just, it's our theme, but we saw it as pieces that we could repurpose and reuse over and over and over, so we're not having to reinvent the exact same thing on every single website. So we started that by creating module-specific styles. So as we were building out everything for Riverland, we were starting to, you know, like, here's my accordion SAS file, or here's my index, here's the hero, thinking that if you needed to copy pieces of that, literally just from this donor theme to the other, you would know exactly where to get the styles for that. You're not having to scan through 3,000 lines of CSS or whatever on a different project, and to try to make each piece of it more portable. So this was kind of the start of the idea of it, where we saw that like, this can happen, we can do this. And then we actually went and using BEM, and actually I got to credit the Scientific American team in that that was where I actually was first exposed to using BEM and using SAS at the time. It was like super overwhelming, but it really helped see that and then feed into Riverland and how we can use it to make this new toolkit, and they're doing great things. So we started using BEM internally in how we're writing our SAS, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's block element modifier. It's just how you write your styles, and through that, like, here's the modifier for the green, here's the modifier for the orange, the quarter, the half layout, and trying to make it actually still human readable though. So anybody that takes this, wasn't the original developer on the project, takes it over, they can kind of piece it together and see what the pieces are. So we thought, what if we reconfigure all of this that we built for Riverland and find what like the common layouts that pretty much could be applicable on like any website that we build, whether it's here's the grid layout, here's how you handle this carousel. and then make it vanilla enough to be reused to where you're not over-designing it, under-design it, but just the starting piece. And then we get Launchpad. Not to be confused with this Launchpad on your machine. It's the Launchpad for every project that you work on. And it looks like this. So it looks a lot like Riverland, and where we have the different module-specific SAS files. But it has an added layer on top of that, and now I've laced the Bootstrap framework on top of it to be extended and modified and then built for Mura with specific directories that handle different tasks for the project. And so we'll go into the details on what this is, but this is Launchpad right here. And so we took these custom layouts. We're thinking, well, okay, well, here's like a card layout. We tried to think about what it could be and what would this turn into. It's a little echo. And you can create like some accordion layouts. There's that table that we're talking about. We make a responsive table style where you have a structure or a set of PDFs and a document listing on your website. And give you some starter theme CSS. Like you got just some starter typography. That may not be the header that you want to use or the color of your intro type, but something that could be approachable enough to where you can see how themes are built in the CMS. Because remember, we're working for both beginner and advanced users, so something that anybody can dive in and get familiar with it. Maybe you got some button styles. And just thinking about the pieces that what this would include without going too overboard. So we started doing some research. When I say we, I mean I, and this is off hours and downtime, and it is a year-long journey, if you will, of what we were doing. And I discovered this blog it's called Vehicle, and it was about using Bootstrap as a mix-in library. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. You know, one of my biggest problems that I had with Bootstrap is like it's Bootstrap, and I was like, what if I can use my semantic mix-ins for everything that I want to build? Like that would be great. And the blog post goes and talks about how you can use your less files as, import them as references, and they won't compile it down unless you actually use them as the mix-in. So an example here, like they have the sign-up button or the sign-up box. They're using large button success. And I was like, wow, this is great. That's exactly what I do. I don't have to lace Bootstrap markup throughout all of my work. Sweet, but it's using less and Bootstrap 3. So like, how do I do this with now using SAS? So I referenced the Bootstrap GitHub, and I found this post. Add a way to expose Bootstrap as only mix-ins placeholders with no classes. I was like, that's what I want right there. And then I see, not gonna happen. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then a few months later, someone actually posted about it again with the same need, and they immediately closed it, said it's a duplicate of this other ticket. So I was like, oh gee, what am I doing here? And so I reached out to the guy that made the original post. Have you gained any traction? What are you trying to do? And he referred me, or first I was like, what am I gonna do here? A couple reference links to the post. But he referred me to look at bourbon and refills, and because that was kind of filling the idea of what we were wanting with Launchpad, is that, here's the core bits of like a starter theme that you can build on top of as time goes on, and that you could reuse it on a project by project basis. All right. So these ideas are starting of like what tools we can use and like how are we actually going to accomplish this. But before we got too deep into like how, we needed to define some project goals. So the goals that we had is that this needs to be this new internal starter theme. At least we say internal because that was the original purpose, is that I wanted to make a tool to make my own job easier. I was tired of piecing together pieces of this, that, and the other. I was like, this is the theme I start with, and then here we go. It needed to standardize the workflow. What we were seeing when we had a few different developers on the team, somebody was writing this style, somebody's doing this style, but it needed to set up, this is how we write our themes in Mura. It needed to be easy to be maintained. Is there a switch for that? All right. It needs to be easy to maintain. It needs to accelerate project timelines. It needs to be lean but fully featured. And the biggest part was it needed to be built for Mura 7. So let's go through a couple of the goals on how we were identifying what we can do for those. And the first one is looking at the new internal starter theme. So if anybody, well, there's quite a few people in here that are longtime Mura developers. They probably remember the Merced theme in Mura, and you think that is Mura because it's Merced, and it's so iconic for what the history of the CMS is. And I'm like, okay, look back at what we did. That was my starter theme. That's actually how I learned how to be a CSS developer. When I started at Blue River, I barely wrote CSS. It was through working with Merced that I learned everything. So I'm like, there's something to that in having a starter theme that's approachable that people can take with and run. So let's look at a few of the positives of it. Oops. It was written specifically for Mura, and every line of CSS in there was crafted based on the theme needs. It wasn't repurposing another framework or another theme to kind of make it work, but it was made for Mura. That was great. And it was a great starting point because it wasn't too over or under designed. There was a phase where there was a lot of Mura sites floating around there where people swapped out the logo and changed some colors, and there's my theme. And that showed that the theme was working, I guess, that people were using it. And then eventually we started using jQuery mobile with it, is that it created this foundation for how we can add new technologies as time goes on and maintain it. And it was great what we were doing with it. It was like, cool, now we have these mobile sites that we're working on. This is before we were doing responsive design. But it had some negatives. It was one huge file of vanilla CSS that I would cringe if I had to go open that original Merced file. Like, I don't even know how to use this anymore. So definitely not wanting to do anything like that anymore. And then also negative is that it was jQuery mobile. And that it was a blessing and a curse. With it, while it solved a whole lot of problems, and to go back to what Robert was saying, is that we had kind of created our own set of problems through creating this feature. For right now, there's core features in there and other plugins that were built that they're now obsolete. It was people creating great plugins, and they don't serve a purpose anymore. And one thing is that there's an option in the CMS still, and that says mobile navigation. We don't need that anymore. But it was great for what it was. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's the relationship between what we're doing with theme development and then adding core features into the CMS, and that they can actually help each other in that relationship. And then Goose created this awesome plugin at the time. It was like, whoa, you can have more than one mobile CFM template? That's neat. Who would have thought? And because we had the foundation there, people in the community were making it better and better and better. So we want to get some of that, but also be aware of that we're not just going to create a problem for ourselves or do all this work and have it not be usable anymore. So then we get Mura Bootstrap 3. And I want to say this is a dark time for me as a theme developer because I absolutely hate Mura Bootstrap 3. I'll tell you why. I look at this and it just didn't do anything to me. I'm like, it looks like Bootstrap. It doesn't look like Mura to me. Oops, I don't know what key I just hit. But it did have some positives. It was using a lot of newer tech. Through it, I learned less. That was something that, as we keep moving, get the best of it that you can out of it. We also got CF static out of it. That was really cool at the time. I was like, I got less. I'm compiling all my my JavaScript, and we're doing this, and the other. It was really cool what we were doing with it. And it was fully featured. You had access to the entire Bootstrap 3 framework. It was just there at your fingertips. But it had some negatives. It's kind of hideous. You weren't inspired to just swap out a logo and you're like, there's my theme. You couldn't have that same effect like you could with Merced. That and less is becoming less popular. And CF static was problematic in production. We had a site that compiled down. This is many 5-6 years ago at this point, but made an 11 meg CSS file because it kept compiling down on itself. So you don't want that happening. And then I guess it's deprecated in newer versions of Mura CMS. We don't use CF static anymore. And with it being fully featured, it was really bloated for most websites that I worked on. If you're only using 10% of the features, why do you have the entire framework? So we definitely didn't want that. And in this case, it really wasn't ideal for a starter theme because if I'm trying to teach somebody how to write a theme or CSS, why would you teach them by undoing instead of actually just writing the styles that you want? It just didn't make sense for the goal that I wanted Launchpad to have. So we're starting to get a little bit of a picture of what it is and what it isn't, things to look out for, and that's goal one. We need to standardize the workflow. So there was a lot of decisions that had to be made, and with it, even more questions that came up. Do we use less, or do we use SASS? I mean, I was the one using SCSS internally. There was other developers still writing in less, like back and forth. Well, is there a right or wrong way? We had to decide what we were going to do. Ultimately, we decided that we're going to just move forward. We're using SCSS. We're done with less. Do we use a framework as the start of this? You know, the original poster on GitHub had said, "Oh, check out bourbon and refills." But do we use one, or do we create our own? Like, what are we trying to do here with this starter theme? You know, do we use Bootstrap, Foundation? You know, should we switch gears and maybe just try something new? Do we want to keep using Bootstrap, or do we try out bourbon? Ultimately, we decided that we want to move forward with Bootstrap. There's a lot that, it's just well known. We never got a phone call that I'm aware of that somebody said, hey, make us a theme and make it bourbon as the framework. Or make it, maybe once we got a call about using Foundation. And so there's just so much happening with Bootstrap that it made sense to have it, to be able to say that we've got a starter toolkit that has Bootstrap at the foundation of it. But then we asked, well, what version? Version 3 was stable and known, but it's closed off to new features. Like, they're just fixing bugs at this point. And I had recently completed a project where I was having to extend features that just didn't exist in version 3, that do exist in version 4 now, that you can do text align based on like breakpoint, where they have like text right is the class that they put. But then you have to like undo it, and they don't have it's just complicated. Like, these features that just should be part of 3 just aren't there. So do we look at 4, where it's still in alpha, but there's quite a lot of these new features that I was having to extend on top of the version 3 that are just built into version 4. And I knew this project that we were going to be working on was going to take a long time, so I was like, okay, well, it's still alpha. We'll figure it out. It'll be more developed by the time we're like ready to like have it out there. So we decided, okay, we'll go with version 4, but it's alpha. But they actually have had quite a few alpha updates along the way, and I don't know, has anybody been following the Bootstrap 4 alpha at all? Anybody? Maybe a couple people? Well, it's actually really cool. I started it when they were in the alpha 2 phase, and I was like, this is awesome. I can see where they're going to go with this. But then there's this long period of time. The alpha 3 update did not come until July. And with it, they changed a whole bunch of like everything, because it's alpha, why not? And then they released quite a few more updates. I've not actually updated to the alpha 6 at this point. I have to figure out a few specifics on that, more specifically that they are doing Flexbox by default now and not floats. And we'll have to figure out a few things on that. But you can see that they're actually starting to ramp up more frequent updates, and it's great to see that what it's going to become. And I'm seeing less and less things that I'm having to refactor all together, like all their mix-ins, the names changed. So the big theme here was new plus old, no good. New plus new, way good. So they're like, well, what else do we put into this starter kit? You know, if you're building this theme, do we like pre-wire up like Font Awesome in it as a theme developer? Are we using it? It's this diverse icon set. It's constantly updating. It's easy to use and well documented. But we rarely use more than a few icons, short of like the menu button, an open and close, like plus and minus. It's like, do we need to use everything? We decided to keep it in there for now. I mean, that's the thing, is it's a living theme. If we end up doing something else, we'll take that out. But for the now, being able to create these demo pages of how you can use it, it's quite useful to have it in there. And then, so what was the methodology? Are we going to go with BEM? I know there's a lot of blogs out there like BEM's difficult. BEM's, I mean, that was me when I first started. I was like, I don't know how to do this. You know, what about SMACs? Use some like atomic design, the inverted triangle CSS. You know, what are we doing? And so I decided BEM-ish, and the ish is a blurry line, because it's all about balance. Because BEM is by its rules very specific on like how you do things. And I was running into this case like, am I enforcing the rules versus easy to use, and that if you can't maintain it, or if it's hard to explain, you're not going to maintain it. And so figuring out how to make it work for you. And so there's quite a few articles out there about how people are using it in their own way. And there were just some cases where the markup was challenging, that there's stuff that like I just can't change in the content renderer right now, like pagination. I can't put a class on the list items or the anchors at this point, but I can on the unordered list. And so if you wanted to truly do BEM and have a class on everything along the way, it's not there. So with this, though, gives me something to go back to the product team and say, hey, this is something that can be useful to other developers. And so now it is, again, the theme driving features into the product. So the recap: SCSS, Bootstrap 4, Font Awesome, and BEM. Goal 3 needs to be easy to maintain. And it's a living theme, and it always needs to be updated and refined. In the short amount of time of actually using Launchpad, I discovered many things that we realized that, like, oh, this is what it's going to be. This is how it's going to work. You're like drawing this up, and a lot of it didn't work that way. And we'll go into this. Like Bootstrap, I was like, yeah, it'll be easy. I'll set up my Bootstrap directory in its own directory, and I won't customize any other stuff, and I could just update it wholesale. And that's what I did with this like framework directory, where you can just replace it every time there's a new build out. But the grid mixins are problematic. And so even though I was able to update to the latest version, all the mixins I was using in the rest of my files were just breaking. And so the idea of it being easy to update was going to be like, oh, we'll see. But hopefully that will stabilize once they get past all of their alpha. And Font Awesome is just easy peasy to update, just drop in the new font files. But I realized I was working on a project on a newer build of Launchpad that I had updated Font Awesome, and I'm like, these icons aren't loading. What's going on? Oh, because it's, version 4.7 instead of 4.6. But it's good to keep that updated, because you may reference their docs thinking you have the latest version and realize that you don't actually have it in the build. So we make some refinements on everything, and issues need to be reported and resolved. And needs to be, anybody on the team could be able to go and update these and communicate them like, hey, there's an issue with this, there's an issue with that, how do we solve this? And if it's a bigger thing, we have to add it to a feature roadmap that if we can't solve it right then, we still need to make note of like, how do we solve this? And we're still figuring some of that out. But there's a few quick wins. We realized that just using a z-index file in your helpers directory, as anybody that's worked with quite a few layers of z-index spread throughout however many different files, realize what a pain it is to deal with. Just create a bunch of variables in a single file. You could order it in the way they stack, and magically, z-index isn't so complicated. So we created a SAS file just for that. So, and that was easy. That was like a 10-minute thing. Well, why didn't we do it? What's the harm? And it worked out well for us. Almost through the goals, and then we'll get into some of the more details of how Launchpad works. But goal 4 is it needs to accelerate the project timelines. So we need to repurpose when possible. And what that means here is, like, if there's something, like, there's no reason to reinvent every piece that we build on site. You have here's this grid layout that does this. There's a responsive table that does that. Or we need to make it in a way that I can take these Mura 7 display objects, or these subtype layouts that can be reused on any new theme going forward. And to do that, Launchpad had to be this donor theme. So we got the concept of the donor theme where everything's fully featured and documented. Look at all this cool stuff it does. But what you actually start the project with is a lot more of a blank slate, and you donate those pieces into the new theme. And we're still trying to figure out what that looks like and how to support two at the same time, because I don't want to create the same problem that I didn't like in Bootstrap 3, and that I was having to turn everything off right from the start. And I heavily used variable tokens and for setting like this base font and embedded font. So if anybody has done like the different like font embedding, or trying to remember like what is the name of that? How many is there? 2 R's or 2 S's? Like trying to remember the font name. I just have my variable that's embedded font bold, and like that's the same on every single project going forward. So I don't ever have to think about what that typeface is. I just know that like that's the bold weight. And it makes it easier to swap out any of the embedded type or colors on the next project. I just go to the config file where I've set a lot of these, and don't have to go through however many different files to replace the mix-in that's named after the font itself. And with it, we built a library of display objects. and a library of collection layouts. And so this is something new for Mura 7, is the collection layouts are incredibly powerful. And we'll show this in the next couple slides. And we started to use gulp and live reload. And this was big for us because we got rid of CF static and less. We needed a way to compile everything down. And we didn't need to have every developer to have CodeKit to compile everything down, like how we're going to handle all that. And I worked with Eddie to get this going. And we'll demo it a little bit in the lightning talk tomorrow. But that's actually worked out really well to just work and never have to think about actually compiling your code. And use Bootstrap features where you can. Sometimes just the default pagination will work just fine for what you're doing. That can save time on a project. Lean but fully featured. They are not mutually exclusive. And this was very difficult to have both. So here's a case of looking at the framework file that we have where I'm calling all the Bootstrap modules. And most of it I've commented out. And this is before, it's been minified and doing different things with it. But as it was then, at the time I'm taking the screenshot, it was like 97K. Not including everything, it's also compiling. But to show that if we only are using the cards, the pagination, tags, alert, and media, that was that. But if you included everything in Bootstrap, it was 149K. But if I'm not using their nav or their nav bar or their jumbotron, why would you compile it down? So I've got this config file that you can just turn them on as needed. So if you're starting a new build, you're like, oh, I need that feature. Similar to what you would see in working with content render, where you need to find custom classes on different Mura elements. This worked out well that, say Eddie needs to build a feature down the line, but he sees it in the Bootstrap docs, I want to do this. He can just go turn that on, and now he has access to all that. He doesn't need me to go and wire up that piece of it. And also to add to the lean bit is using the Mura 7 display objects. So if you have specific styles for like your homepage hero slideshow, you can split them out into this different SAS file, have it compile down its own CSS file, and only load it when you call that display object. There's no reason to call that slideshow CSS on every single page. And so the Mura 7 display objects make that incredibly easy to wire up those different pieces. And then also, just think about, you may not be using a lot of the Mura features out of the box, but they're there, but I wanted to ship Launchpad with maybe some fresh calendar styles or the fresh rater styles or a new tag cloud. But not everybody's going to use those features, so I don't want to give everybody the entire CSS. So you got the option to turn those on and off as you're using them. And another thing that comes up quite a bit is an admin-specific CSS file that you only call that specific CSS file when you're logged in. Where it was extra handy is in Bootstrap, the class of H1 and the class of H2 make the other elements look like the other headings. The Lucy error has the class of like H1 on things. And so if you're loading Bootstrap, everything is going to be gigantic. And so you might just want to write a little bit of CSS in your admin CSS file to make it so you can actually read your own errors. And last is it needs to be built for Mura 7. So we've got brand new version of the CMS. How do we leverage all of the features? In this case, it was the tipping point where much of this process became possible. Collection layouts, for one, is huge. And so I was like, yeah, let's look Mura 7, this is going to be great. And so here we have, independently of your page templates that you can have collection templates. So this is a folder where I'm outputting a whole bunch of different PDFs. I'm kicking out a few tags, and I didn't want the standard folder layout. Traditionally, you might think, oh, I need to customize DSP content lists, or maybe I got to create a subtype, change the subtype rendering. Now everything could just be done through creating a custom layout, independent of your subtype, independent of your page template. And it's just an incredibly powerful tool to have all of this, and that just wasn't possible in earlier versions of Mura. So we wanted to leverage this on all of these new layouts for sites going forward. So for example, this is a folder layout. You could have a card layout. But really, it's just endless possibilities. That it's a new tool. Like, what can we do with it? And so we said good riddance to all the subtypes. Like the fact that we were creating subtypes to limit your subtypes and you click add new page and you're just like wall of all these subtypes. That'll be a lot easier to deal with now because you're not creating subtypes just to manage the layout. That's not the right tool. So to recap all those goals, it needs to be new internal starter theme, it needs to standardize the workflow, easy to maintain, accelerate project timelines, but fully featured and built for Mura 7. So I looked at that, all right, that's a lot of work to do. So we started working on it. And here we have Launchpad. So at the root of what we have is a site.scss file that calls in all of my helpers, all of my framework, which is Bootstrap in this case, thinking maybe down the line we can make it to work with more than one different framework. And then we have this framework extended file that maybe we're already adding more features on top of version 4 that was already adding features to version 3, but we'll go into some of the details on what we're doing with that, our typography styles, all the specific modules that we have, that's your theme essentially, and then anything specific to Mura down at the bottom here. So that's your like calendars, your comments, ratings, that sort of thing. Trying to keep like things organized. So if we look at the helpers SCSS file, we're going to include like our colors, our variables, our mixins, our font mixins, and then that z-index file that I just mentioned. And what this actually functions as is the Bootstrap 4 framework has this custom SCSS file where you're supposed to set all these colors and variables before everything compiles down, so that way you can like take off rounded corners or change the default button file. But if you remember, I wanted to be able to go download Bootstrap at any point in time and replace that directory wholesale. So I kind of abstracted everything out of that directory and load that before I call everything in, so I'm not intermixing my stuff with their stuff. So in this case, it allows me to rapidly update the entire framework directory without wiping out any of the customizations that we have. So let's look at a little bit of the contents of that framework file. So I don't use the Bootstrap nav bar, I have my own navigation, but the cards were useful. I don't use their breadcrumb style, I have my own breadcrumb, but if I wanted to, I can uncomment that and it's there. But pagination was pretty good out of the box, and that works pretty well for any of the default folders, so I'll include that piece of Bootstrap. And effectively, I created a framework SCSS file that functions the same as bootstrap.scss. But now we have this framework extended. What does that do? It creates styles that are adding things to Bootstrap, like the alert styles, or the button, the card, and some of the type styles. And it's meant to extend the core functionality, and the big piece is be theme agnostic enhancements, so things that could be applicable on any site going forward. One example of this is the alerts. You got your success, info, warning, and danger, I think is what the classes are. Why isn't there a gray one? I don't know why. This is useful. That's like my search results. You're showing 1 of 10 results. So I added that into my extended directory in the thought that if they ever add it, I can just nuke the one file that I have. But for now, I need to extend the framework. Another thing is, we've got a whole bunch of elements that maybe we want to use the primary button styles, but we don't have a way to put a class on it, or it's going to be difficult to actually go and modify the markup. So I'm going in and extending the button class and button primary on vanilla buttons or elements with the type of button, type of reset, type and submit, just to backfill some things. Maybe you think like form builder or your login form that you can rapidly deploy the button and button primary styles to it. So it's kind of a lot that goes into how do you use it as it is without using their markup, and a lot of moving parts. The next directory is typography.scss, and I split this out from the rest of the theme, mostly because the typography SCSS file is used to pull it into your editor.scss, which ultimately becomes your editor CSS, and you don't need the rest of your modules on your site and your editor styles. These are like your headings, your intro paragraphs, list styles, table styles, all of that. And to me, it didn't make sense to have it with the rest of the module. It's like, here's the general global styles, and then leave the modules directory be the things that you port from a new site to new site. Those are what you want to reuse. And then it had quite a few like @FontFace declarations there in there using silent mix-ins. And in Sash, you have the way to create silent mix-ins, so you can create like a placeholder. So when everything compiles down, it'll compile it down in this spot and how you can reference it from different files. It's a really cool thing you do. And then when I need to use the embedded font, I can do @extend embedded the silent mix-in of embedded font bold. So I might have my H2 here, and I have that. So if I get a new design and they change the heading, I don't have to go update the mix-in on 20 different files. I just go update the reference where that's being called. And now we get into the modules.scss, where these are the guts of your theme. Here's your form styles, your search results. I've got a responsive table. Here's your responsive video, your sidebar nav, your index, which is your folder styles. All of these that can be brought into a new project or referenced easily and organized accordingly. Some things that would be included in like the form CSS is the like the Mura login form or the Mura checkbox group. Literally every site that I build, I have to re-inspect the markup because I don't remember off the top of my head like what's the class that we put on those elements. So it's kind of nice just going into a file and you're like, that's the checkbox right there. I got the styles, we're good. And so I can just stub out everything I need for that ahead of time. So it's another way to save some time. And then with videos being really popular on the web, I wired up like the embed responsively styles. So that way, if somebody adds a video after the fact, after you ship the theme, you've kind of accounted for them not blowing up the video on responsive pages. Then we got the Mura SCSS, looking at things like the calendar comments, Mura object, Raider, sitemap, tag cloud. See what we can do to change those for the Launchpad theme and show people that you can write styles for these Mura display objects if you want. One thing is in the ratings in the Raider SCSS file, I have to strong arm some styles because there's a little bit of a bug in it right now. But in this case, I wanted the H3 to look like the H4 because it's hard to tell right here, but this is about like 4 pixels larger than this type right here. I just wanted to fix that. Just little things that I can backfill for the time being until we can get them resolved. And then it also creates a list of things that I can go to the product team to like, hey, let's fix this. From there, we created an admin overrides SCSS file. And there's your styles to fix the loosey dump of the headings that were getting pretty bad. And it was nuts where you load it, just I can't even see this. How do I fix it? Duh, you used to write some CSS to fix the style, but that's how it gets rendered, right? Or if anybody's had any issues with like the overflow hitting, messing up any of their like components or things they've placed on the page, you can write styles to fix the thing so that way your admins get a great experience too, and you can target just that display object that you're trying to fix. And you can hammer away at it with importance if you need to, because only your admins are getting that CSS file. And then we created this custom objects directory that has the Mura 7 display objects, like your hero SCSS that we were talking about earlier. This gives us access to all of our media queries or our color variables. You know, we maybe need access to our primary color or this accent color, etc. And we have it in the core of the theme, but notice there's no underscore in front of this hero SCSS. What this means is it's going to compile down and create its own CSS file, and I'm not including it, or not importing it into the main site.scss. So we get access to the mix-ins and everything here because in the top of the file I'm including the variables and colors and everything, keep it with the theme. But now I'm just going to compile it down into this other directory and create this hero CSS that I call it from the display object itself. And it's pretty simple in this case, just using the M loader. You can load in your own specific CSS for that display object. And so we're starting to explore different ways how that can be done, realizing there's some challenges with that, and that you actually want some CSS before it actually loads, not just once the display object is loaded, because you would see like the flash of everything coming in. So there's different ways we're trying to figure out how to handle that, but ultimately it makes this display object a little bit more portable, and we're looking at ways that we can make it so we can compile directly into that display object's directory instead of the CSS directory where everything else is at. And anybody that's looked through a bunch of lines of CSS would find having little like tabs, if you will, of being able to find which file all of the CSS compiled down from. So at the top of all the files, I have a little note of like, this came from this file, so you can search through and figure out where it came from to help troubleshoot the error. And so that's really the structure of everything with the SCSS. And what was neat about it is it's not too much different than for how we building themes in the past, but it's just trying to be more strategic about this goes here, and you get access to like the entire framework of what you've called, and it's proven to be pretty powerful for us so far. The switch from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4, there were some pretty major shifts. Keep going back to pagination because it used to be just a class on the UL element, but now they've got a class on the UL, the list item, and the anchor. And that was one of the first walls that I hit on working on this project, is like, how am I going to handle this? In this case, I was able to use some extends to extend the classes on how that would work without having to go back and update any of the markup. And working in alpha is working in alpha. There's a lot of moving parts. If anybody plans on using the Bootstrap 4 framework, be glad that you started it now and not a year ago, because it's been a long journey doing that. And the grid system has been overhauled at least twice since I've been working on it. And that what came out of it is that we realized that there's a lot of Mura core enhancements needed, and we're going to be working with the product team to give even more controls in content render for your theme. And so by starting something new from the ground up, it's exposed some things like this that we can make better. And so it's just great to be able to then, everybody gets that just from me banging my head against content render and what we can and can't do to add classes to these elements. Also through building this, the approach has shifted quite a few times. I used to have a different directory that was like, here are the core files that have just the header or just the footer, and then all your modules over here. And so like my own documentation for what I've done is out of date. And so when we hire a new developer, Alexa just started with us about a month ago now, and I'm trying to explain to her how it's done. I say, oh, check the docs that I wrote. Well, the docs that I wrote are already out of date. And so be mindful of the shifts that you have, and that developers don't like writing documentation, in my experience. But it's really important to keep that and then have a point of truth of what you're trying to do here. And managing the balance of the donor theme versus the core theme, trying to figure out on the details of how that works and how do we release it, because the core doesn't serve too much of a purpose without the donor theme, but the donor theme is not what you start with. And you want to demo it fully featured, but then one's like this toolkit, and I see one as like, one's a theme and everything with it, and one's just, this is where you actually start. And then deciding what is Launchpad core, and avoiding being too style opinionated along the way. Like, this is how you handle pagination. It's like, no, that's just how I decided I wanted to handle pagination, and finding a good balance of like, what do you ship it with? A lot of the naming conventions could use an audit. There's a lot of classes that I took a few month break from working on Launchpad, and I came back to it, and I couldn't even tell you what that class was for. And so it's obvious that it needs some work, and we can clean some of that up. And it's very easy to go way overboard with variables. You're like, I need a variable. This is my header, drop down, current state, like just hundreds of these variables. And you're like, it's a demo site. It needs all these. Look at how fully featured it is. It's great. But in how you'd actually use it, it's probably not like that at all. And so exploring how we can dial that back a bit so we can get something that everybody can start their new theme with. And then also when returning to Launchpad, I realized that there's just like so many different files, and I'm like, what is this? This doesn't even make sense. A good example is I had one file for search and one for search results. Well, I'm like, in my head, I'm like, well, one's that trigger the search and like the little drop down that does all this, and one's for the results. But do they need to be split up? Or do you get a little bit of, just being overwhelmed by you seeing 30, 40 different SAS files when some of them can be merged together. And so it's a lot of thinking has to happen on how that works, and thankful to have other team members who can chime in and say that, yeah, well, maybe we can merge them. And if it makes sense that we have to pull them apart again, then we will. You know, when do you create a new module? Does the primary nav go into the header? Or are there two different SAS files? How do you handle that? And again, with search and search results. These are a lot of decisions that need to be made that it's not really a one-person job to decide the best way to do it. It's coming out of us actually using it, and it's been fun. Working solo on a huge project is incredibly challenging, so if anybody plans to do anything like this on their own, just be prepared what you're getting into, and don't think it's like, yeah, I'm just going to extend Bootstrap and write the entire brand new Mura theme. And a second pair of eyes goes a long way when resolving some inconsistencies. I'm guessing since I started at one point, I was heavily using pixels, and then at one point I was heavily using rems, and so I need to clean up a whole bunch of that. And some of the SCSS is overly complex, and it's intimidating to new theme developers. And so I know when I made the first switch over to SCSS, you look at it like, well, I don't even know what this function does. Like, I don't get it. To be careful not to do something just because you can, because I'm trying to make this for both beginning and expert Mura users. And right at the moment, it needs to be tested in real-world projects. And that we found this is the best way to discover inefficiencies. Alexa recently started working on a project, and the buttons, we couldn't get the rounded corners to go away. We're like, this is weird, like, should be able to do this. Oh, well, because we don't have a variables.scss file to redefine the Bootstrap border radius file. And so it wasn't like something that I never even thought of that I needed that file in the helpers until it came into a real world scenario that we need to do that to have that available to us. And it's great to have this new toolkit that's gone through the paces of, like, this has been tested. This is how we've used it on an actual project. This works for us, and maybe it could work for you guys. A few other Mura core enhancements that we're going to work on to resolve some of those to make that easier. Now and then we're looking into some of the nice to haves. We're working on adding AMP support. Paul and the other members on the team are working on integrating that into the CMS. It'd be good to have a good example of like how you can use that. Similar to how we had jQuery mobile back in Merced, how can we get AMP baked into, like, here's how you can start trying it on your own. And then maybe have some examples of like, oh, here's how you can do some of your schema. Just the thought that it could be a training theme in addition to like this toolkit. And the next bit is to release it, and date to be determined. I want to finish the current project that I'm working on, using it before I release it to the wild, but the plan is to release it to everybody so they can hammer away at it, see what works, what doesn't work, provide feedback. And because if it's valuable for me, it's probably valuable for other people. And if you get one little piece of information out of it, that's great for anybody that's a Mura theme developer.